Hey guys, another video for our How to Do Stuff in Japan playlist. Although perhaps because it's another heads up video, maybe we should start another playlist. It's called the Heads Up playlist, because a lot of that how-to stuff is really like that. It's just a matter of, often it's a matter of just being aware of how things work so that you don't end up either feeling bad or putting yourself in a bad position or something like that. That's why we make a lot of these videos, is so that you're aware of them before these things happen to you or before you get involved in these things. So we'll get to the point. There was a email came this week from one of our patrons who was obviously having a pretty bad day, and the story was that he'd been teaching a business class in English and for one of the big English schools in Japan, and he said he felt he had a really good rapport with this group of students. They were adult males, and from one particular company that would come once a week to be taught business English. And he said he thought he had a really good rapport with them, and they had a lot of fun, and that, you know, at the end of every lesson or during each lesson he'd ask them, you know, do you understand, and do you have any questions? And every time they'd all say, no, we understand, no questions, and or occasional question, but basically, you know, suggesting that, or answering that yes, they understood what he'd explained and that it was all good. And so he said he thought he had great rapport with them and great communication with them, and it was all going well. And then he got called into his boss's office, and the boss told him that the students had complained that he was moving too quickly through the what do they call it, the books and the syllabus, that he was moving too quickly through the syllabus and they couldn't keep up and they didn't understand what he's explaining. So he was really upset that they kept telling him that they understood and that everything was okay, and then they went behind his back, is what he said, behind his back to his teacher, to his boss rather, and complained to his boss that, you know, they didn't understand. So he was really upset about it. Now, this is a really common situation. There's as usual with Japanese stuff, there's a whole heap of complex issues in play here. One of them is, of course, that nobody ever wants to upset the wa. Nobody wants to make ripples in the pond. Nobody wants to make anyone feel bad or create a bad vibe. So obviously, the students in that class didn't want to say that they couldn't keep up with him or couldn't follow him or didn't understand him or whatever, because they didn't want to make him feel bad. And also probably there was other things at play there with their co-workers and things, not wanting to admit that they didn't understand what was going on, or all sorts of complex stuff like that. So there's that. And the other thing is too, one of the other things as well, is that in Japan you've got the kohai senpai thing, so that everybody feels that they have some position relative to everybody else. So no one's sort of equal. Everybody's either above or below everybody else. And as we've talked about on some previous videos, that makes life really complicated in Japan as well. But that often means, what that often means is, if you combine the not making waves thing with the senpai kohai thing, what often happens is people will go above you to talk about, instead of talking directly to you. If they have a problem with you, whatever that might be, they'll go above you. And it's seen as the right thing to do in Japan. It's what people often do. And instead of having the actual, any conflict or any sort of uncomfortable feeling with the person directly, they go to their senpai or their sensei or someone above them, and then or their boss in this case, and then that person sort of diplomatically talks to them about it, so that it's sort of once removed, or sometimes 2-3 times removed from the actual people themselves, so that it doesn't create any bad vibe. And then the idea is, and my advice to this guy was, when you go back to that class, so I explained a little bit to him and told him this video was coming, but I also said to him, when you go back to that class, just make like nothing happened. And because that's the way Japanese people do it. You know, if he went back into the class and said, hey, you people kept telling me that everything was okay, and you've gone to my boss and complained. If he did that, that would create a bad vibe and it make everybody feel bad, which is why they didn't talk to him about it in the first place. You can sort of see how, if you were Japanese, how that would sort of prove that their way of doing things is correct. You know, that oh, now look what happened, the foreigners come straight to us and he's hooking into us about it because you know, he's upset, we've damaged his ego or we've upset him in some way. So this is really hard because, of course, in a lot of cultures, like our friend that sent the email, and in a lot of cultures, our thinking is that if you have a problem with someone, you talk directly to them. That's the way a lot of our cultures work, isn't it? That we think that that's the correct thing to do. If I have a problem with someone, I should talk directly to them. And in fact, we have a lot of things that we say that when people don't do that, don't we? We say, he went behind my back. He stabbed me in the back. He went over my head. All those sort of sayings that we have, there's a lot of them, isn't there? In English in particular, there's a lot of sayings like that for people who do that, who don't directly talk to us, who go and talk to someone else instead. So in a lot of our cultures, we really don't like that. And so when it happens to us, it makes us feel really uncomfortable, doesn't it? And so I'll give you another example. Another one. This is one of mine. This is from years ago. When I first came to Japan, there was a guy here who helped me get an apartment, and I was having a bit of a hard time. The real estate people didn't want to rent to foreigners, and this guy was pretty well connected, and so he actually helped me get an apartment, a nice new apartment, you know, which was a wonderful thing for him to do, generous thing for him to do. And I was really appreciative of it. So he helped me get an apartment. I moved into the apartment. And we used to hang out a bit, you know, we used to do some things, kart racing, go-kart racing and drinking and a few things like that together now and again. And then he went to Australia for a holiday for a week, and I planned his itinerary, helped him plan his itinerary, and then I made all the bookings for him. So I booked for him to go flying in Cairns in Australia, so go for a flying lesson in Cairns in an aeroplane, Cessna, and go diving out on the reef and go up to the Daintree and go over the rainforest and book this 1 week holiday for him and basically organise the whole thing. So the way it works in Japan, if someone does something good for you, something nice for you, like he did helping me get my apartment, you then have obligation to them, which is called giri. And you're supposed to never forget that giri. So basically you owe them forever, sort of thing, you know. However, because I'd also helped him organise his Australian trip and put a lot of time and effort into that, it sort of felt like the giddy was sort of even, you know, the obligation was sort of even, and it sort of felt like we were sort of associates, you know, we're sort of, I hesitate to say friends, but we sort of were. We hung out a bit and drank, and we went go-kart racing and did a few other things like that, and we got on pretty well. However, along the way there, I got engaged, and I got married, and then I had children, and I got busy, you know, and so he was continuing on his party life with his drinking and partying and that sort of thing, and I couldn't sort of do as much of that anymore because I was busy with the family and working and inconvenient stuff like that. So apparently he missed me, which is sort of nice, and he was offended that I wasn't hanging out with him as much anymore. Now, in a lot of cultures, what would probably happen in this case is that guy would either just forget me and move on, or he'd send an email and say, hey, let's catch up and have dinner and a drink, or let's go out for a few drinks, or something like that, right? In which case, if he had have done that, if I'd have gotten emails from him saying, hey, let's go have a few drinks or something like that, I definitely would have said yes, no doubt about it. You know, we would have found a time to go spend a few hours and have a few drinks and a bit of a chat, and that would have been good. So that's what could have happened. But because it's Japan, what happened, and because of this particular guy, what happened was, instead of contacting me, he phoned another guy in our town who I know well, and who he knows well, and who I sort of have a professional relationship, sort of business relationship with, and also sort of a friendship thing with. And he is this guy's senpai. So I think this guy's feeling was that this third guy was his senpai and was sort of my senpai in some ways too, because he's actually an accountant, so he gives me business advice, accounting advice for Japan, you know. And so what he did was he called him and said to him, you know, I haven't heard from the Aussie guy for 2 years, and you know, I helped him get his apartment, you know, when he first came to Japan, and then, you know, after that, you know, 2 years I haven't heard from him, and you know, sort of complained to him that he hadn't heard from me. Now, again, in another country, that third guy would have just said, well, why don't you give him a call? Why are you calling me? Why don't you give him a call or send him an email and catch up with him, you know? But that wasn't what happened. They're going, oh, really? That's no good. And then hung up. And then that third guy told his wife, this is what's happened, is, you know, that other dude's been wants to hang out with the Aussie guy and he hasn't heard from him. And she said, oh, that's no good. So then she could have called me as well, because I know her rather well as well, but she didn't call me either. She called my wife, right? So the original guy whose feelings are hurt because we haven't been hanging out has called another guy who knows me, who's told his wife, who's then called my wife and said, oh, you know, can we catch up sometime for lunch? And she's gone and had lunch with my wife and told her this sad story about how this guy who I used to hang out with is sad because I haven't hung out with him recently. Right? So of course my wife's come home and told me this, and as a person who's not Japanese, that really pissed me off, because it's like, why are all these people involved? Why didn't that first guy just send me an email and say, let's go have a beer? I would have said yes. You know, and from a non-Japanese point of view, it all seemed like a whole heap of bullshit, to be honest, and a whole heap of pussy behaviour from people that should have spoken to me directly, you know. And at the time, just as a complication at the time, my wife was heavily pregnant and had been told to take it easy and not get stressed. And of course, stuff like this in Japan is really stressful for Japanese people when you get these sorts of drama things going on. It's really quite stressful. So that made it worse too. It was like, why are they bothering her with this stuff that has nothing to do with her? You know, it was ridiculous. So again, that's a classic example of what happens here, and you know, that's sort of similar. That's a sort of a social version of what happened to our patron with his students and his boss. And we hear stories like this all the time. It happens with neighbours. It happens with pretty much any relationship that you can imagine in Japan. This sort of stuff can happen. You know, neighbours is a classic too. You know, so if the neighbour wants to tell you something, quite often the neighbour won't tell you. They'll tell another neighbour, you know, who tells someone else, and it goes around in a big circle, and eventually it comes back to you. And it leaves you feeling, as a non-Japanese person, it can leave you feeling lots of bad feelings, because, you know, first of all, you've had a whole bunch of people talking about you, which makes you feel uncomfortable. And then there's that natural thing that we have is, why didn't they talk to me? You know, you can imagine in my case with that guy, you know, it's really hard now. I definitely don't want to hang out with that guy now, because to me, he's got no balls. He's got no, you know, that sort of behaviour from a grown man, you know, to not be able to just contact me and say, let's have a beer, instead to cause all that drama for all those people and to make that into such a big deal, you know. And it's the same, of course, with our friend there with his students and his boss. You know, he's got to stand up in front of those dudes now, and because they're all men too, they're all grown men as well. And he's got to stand up in front of them now and pretend that everything's fine, and he really does. He really does. If he goes into that classroom and sort of hassles them about it or complains about it or says, why didn't you tell me? It's only going to make it worse. What I suggested to him is that from now on he takes it slowly, and that at each step he asks each of them individually if they're understanding what's happening, and that if they've managed to keep up, and then make them individually answer that they've understood what he said, because, you know, and go really slowly, because that's really the only way to do it. But we just have to accept it. The purpose of this video is just to to give you the examples, I think examples always help understand these situations, don't they? Because if we give you an example of these things, you can sort of see, you imagine how it would feel if you're in the same situation, right? So you guys can either relate to how I felt about my situation or about how that guy felt, you know, with his students and his boss. And if you can sort of imagine how you'd feel in that situation, it's giving you a bit of a heads up as to what you could experience yourself when you're in Japan. So we have to remember when these things happen, we have to remember that that's normal here. That each of the people involved in that sequence of events is only trying to avoid drama. They're just trying to avoid any bad vibes. And everybody's just trying to maintain the harmony. That's what they're really aiming for, is to maintain the harmony and keep everything cool. And that's everybody's motivation, basically. And it's how Japanese society works. You know, that you see this all the time here. It's how society works. The group works together to make the individuals conform. And there's various ways that happens. I mean, sometimes in schools with the senpai kohai thing, often they can end up being bullying, because if someone's behaving different from the group will bully them into behaving the right way. And it can feel a bit like that even in situations as an adult. You can feel a bit like that sometimes. You've got all these people talking about you, trying to get you to behave in a certain way. And that is sort of what it comes down to. In my situation, my wife understood that we'd been busy with you know, getting married and children and work and house and everything. But the other people all sort of were like, well, why isn't he honouring his obligation to this person? You know what I mean? Instead of saying, why is this pussy phoning us with this stuff? They weren't saying that. They would have been thinking, why isn't the Aussie guy honouring his obligation to this guy who'd helped him out? Because of course that guy told the story about how he helped out getting an apartment and all that sort of thing. Didn't mention the Australian obligation thing, because that's a different thing, of course. But yeah, this is the way it is. And so when these things come up, see, these are the sort of things too. People talk about having Japanese friends. Often we see messages on these videos. People leave comments about their Japanese friends. And the reality is, if you live here long term, you soon realise that what you think is a Japanese friend is really an acquaintance. And it's often because of things like this. It is really hard to have a friendship with someone who behaves like that. You know, you can imagine if you think they're some sort of friend, and then they go off and talk to other people about some issue they've got with you, and then the other people talk to other people who talk to other people, and then it comes back to you. And our friend with his students there, his adult students, and his boss, you know, and he thought he had a good relationship with those students. He thought he had a bit of a sort of a friendship going on with those students, and they had lots of fun and that sort of thing. And then he finds out that, you know, that they've been off talking to his boss about, you know, about him. It leaves him feeling really alienated from them, and that's the case, you know. So actually that probably deserves another video, is talking about the friendship thing, because whenever we see those comments on our videos, you know, I've got a Japanese friend, and I've got all these Japanese friends, and I've got lots of Japanese friends, some people say. And you think, yeah, do you really? Once a few of these sort of things happen, you know, with your friends, with your Japanese friends, then maybe you start to think about them differently, and realise that it's not a criticism. This isn't, of course, like all our videos, they're not a criticism. They're just all our videos, every one of our videos, are just observations. And this is just an observation. Again, another cultural difference between Japanese culture and some of our other cultures, and the way we see these things. You know, and the goal in Japan is just to maintain the harmony. It's not supposed to make you feel bad. It's the opposite. It's supposed to make everything good again. There's been some sort of ripple in the force, and the whole idea is to try and maintain the harmony and restore the harmony. That's really what they're trying to do. But from a non-Japanese person's point of view, it can be a bit uncomfortable for all those reasons. As I'm sure a lot of you are understanding, sitting there thinking, oh, I don't know if I'd like that. And that's why we do it with all these heads up videos. The idea is, if the first time you experience this, or the first time you hear about this is when you experience it for yourself, it can be a real problem for you, because it's like, what the hell? What the hell? Why do you do that for, you know? Whereas at least if you've heard about this before, and that if this does happen to you when you're in Japan, that you might go, oh yeah, I remember this. The Aussie guy talked about this, you know, I remember this, righto. And then if you can remind yourself that yes, this isn't unusual behaviour here, it's sort of normal behaviour here, and that their motivation isn't bad, their motivation is actually to maintain harmony, so their motivation is actually positive, then it might help you, react calmly to it, because it's the only way. Any sort of emotional reaction to any of this behaviour will just make the situation much, much worse, of course. So you really just have to maintain the harmony and just stay cool when this sort of stuff happens, and just go, all right, this is the way it's done here, and you know, don't react emotionally, and don't complain, and don't go confront that first person, because it won't, you know, hey, next time you got a problem, you talk to me directly. No, they won't get that. In actual fact, that'll have the opposite effect, because if you emotionally tell them, talk to me directly, you're proving their point that talking to you directly was not the right thing to do, right? So, and just by talking to them about it, just by saying, I want to talk to you, like that teacher with those students, I want to talk to you, from now on I want you to talk to me directly, that would make them feel so uncomfortable. Even if he did it calmly and coolly and rationally, it would still make them feel uncomfortable and make them less likely to talk to him again, most likely. So it's really important that we don't look at these things from our own perspective. We have to see it from the Japanese perspective. Because, you know, from our own perspective, oh, if someone talks to you directly, you appreciate that. Oh, thank you for talking to me directly. Thank you for not going behind my back. From our point of view, we respect that and appreciate that. But from the Japanese point of view, no, they don't want that. Mostly, generally. And again, all these videos, as well as being observations, they're also generalizations, of course. They have to be, that's the nature of it. And it's not always the case, but in most cases it is. And you'll find out for yourself if you try to do something differently and go back to that first person and say, hey, dickhead, why did you do that? Why didn't you come and talk to me directly? You'll see for yourself what reaction you get to that, you know. And then that ripple will go back down the line as well. And it goes on and on. That's why with these things, you've got to know when to stop. Japanese people are really good at just letting things stop. If something happens, you don't bring it up again. You know how often if we have a problem with someone and you have a bit of a misunderstanding and a bit of a problem, and the next time you see him, say, hey, look, I'm really sorry about last time, and I'm sorry that happened, and I'm sorry it made you feel bad, and you know, I hope we can move on from there, and I hope everything feels better for you now. And often we'll do that, and because we want to clear the air, as we say, we want to clear the air. But from a Japanese point of view, if you've had a drama with someone and you bring it up again, their thinking is, why are you bringing this up again? And I've actually had Japanese people say that to me when I've tried later on to say, hey, listen, I'm sorry about that situation we had there, and they'll say, why are you bringing this up again? Why are we talking about this again? Because it's sort of like you're opening the wound again. Their way of dealing with situations like that is just to let it fade away and pretend it never happened, which it might not be comfortable for us. For a lot of us, might not be comfortable with that, but if that's the way Japanese people do it, then you just have to accept that that's the way they do it, you know. So hopefully this made a little bit of sense. It's feeling a bit disjointed, but hopefully it made a bit of sense, and hopefully it helps somebody. If it helps one person just once, and our friend from Patreon, if it helps you, then it's been worthwhile making the video. More videos coming soon.